My great uncle is hiding something. My family likes to go on a lot of trips. We mostly drive to many places, packing everything we need for the road. It's pretty much a big hassle every time. I always end up going crazy after sitting for many boring hours cooped up in the car, so you can understand my reluctance when my parents told me we were visiting my great uncle. He lives up in the northern part of the US, and the drive was expected to take more than 10 hours. We haven't seen him for a long time, and his wife passed away 2 years ago, remember? My mother was always the one to have a certain reason to go somewhere. It was no use arguing with her. I've only heard stories and seen pictures of Great Uncle Klaus throughout the years, but never actually gotten around to meeting him. My parents said he visited us many times when I was little, but one day he mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Only recently did we hear from him, and his excuse was that he had run away to achieve a better life, a better job. Anyway, I lost the argument with my mother, and so the trip was set. We were going to visit Uncle Klaus. The drive there took way longer than expected, but I somehow pulled myself together. We were driving along a mountainous region because his house was on the top of a hilly area. My uncle had called us earlier to ask how far we had gotten. "I am going to apologize if you don't get parking easily," he had said. "I'll try to make some room." After hearing that, I imagined his house to be a small wooden shack. He probably didn't even have room to park his own car. However, my mindset completely changed when we arrived. As we pulled into the main entrance, my jaw dropped. Sitting in front of me was a huge mansion, spanning for acres. The whole ground was flat on top of the mountainous area, with trees lining everywhere. The driveway ran straight from the large gate to the front of the house. There was a huge lawn, a fountain of a fish statue with water gushing out of its mouth, and other statues on pillars lining the driveway. The mansion itself stood tall in the daylight, towering over the whole landscape. But what amazed me even more was the amount of supercars that were parked in the front. Ferrari, Bugatti, Lambos, Porsche, Martins, and every other expensive car I could think of. They were parked everywhere. No wonder my uncle said we were going to have trouble finding a place to park. This guy was freaking rich! "Holy shit," I whispered to myself as we got out of the car. My parents wore the same expression as they looked at the house. We weren't expecting this at all. As we stared, I heard my name being called out from the front porch. Standing there was my Uncle Klaus. "Welcome, welcome," he said as we walked towards him, a smile tucked behind a white beard and a white mustache. He actually looked like Santa Claus, aside from his small bald head. He was also wearing spectacles, a golf shirt with a thick brown jacket, and dark blue pants. He walked up to me and put his hands on my shoulders. "Wow, you have grown a lot from when I last saw you." He laughed. I smiled. Maybe this trip was a little worth it after all. "You've grown a little yourself," my father answered back jokingly. Uncle Klaus rubbed his belly. "I've been trying to keep on my diet." Then he turned to look at my mother. "I know you still haven't gotten over my absence, but I promise I'm not going to leave again." My mother's eyes teared up, and she replied with a hug, a long one. After all the sentimental nonsense, Uncle Klaus led us into the mansion. I was really excited to check the whole place out. It looked even better on the inside. There were high ceilings, spiraling staircases, large paintings, large pillars, and a huge chandelier that hung at the entrance. "I gotta hand it to you, Uncle Klaus. This is really nice," I told him. "Thank you. You know, with a little hard work and luck, you could pull this off too." He patted my back. "Now, feel free to check everything out while I make sure your rooms are ready." "We'll come with you," my mother said as she nudged my father towards Uncle Klaus, who was walking to the staircase. "I'll catch up with you guys," I shouted over to them. I then walked over to the paintings and inspected them. They were life-size portraits of different landscapes painted in vivid color, and portrayed so beautifully as if I could just step into them. There was also a portrait of Uncle Klaus that hung over the fireplace near the big living room. The walls were lined with packed bookshelves around the whole area. Uncle Klaus sure loved to read. I walked around the mansion even more, visiting every room. He had an indoor swimming pool as well as an outdoor one. There was a huge library, a basketball court, 2 large kitchens, bedrooms, a game room, and even a home theater. Uncle Klaus had everything, and it made me feel guilty for underestimating him earlier. I kept taking a tour of the house, looking at everything in wonder. As I was walking around one of the hallways of the first floor, I started to hear an unusual noise coming from the floor below me. At first, I thought it was the air conditioning or some other pipe making the noise, but as I stopped walking and listened harder, it sounded like small whimpering. The hell? I got on my knees and put my ear to the floor. I could faintly hear something, as if someone was crying. Hello? Anyone there? I was hoping someone didn't come walking down the hallway and see me talking to the floor. It felt stupid enough already. There was no reply. Of course there's no reply, you idiot, my brain told me. It's just a damn floor. I laughed at myself. I decided to just put it off as my imagination. I mean, who would be under the floors? It didn't make any sense. Plus, this house didn't have a basement. I was just about to get up and walk away when, to my shock, there was an answer. Hello? Hello? Who's there? Hello? It was a female voice. She sounded scared, timid. The sudden answer jolted me to my feet. I checked my ears to make sure I was hearing this right. What the hell? Who are you? I asked. My name is Ellie. You have to help me. Please, I can't get out of here. Her voice was weak. I leaned closer to the floor. I tried to find the words to speak. Why are you under the floor? I'm trapped here. He kidnapped me. Who did? He's old, bald, white hair. I think he owns this place. I didn't answer back. Was she talking about Uncle Klaus? Why would Klaus kidnap her? All of these questions ran through my head in seconds. I didn't think this was some sort of elaborate joke. Something was definitely wrong here. Are you still there? Ellie asked. Still here? Now, where? My question was interrupted by the sound of footsteps and Uncle Klaus's voice. I quickly whispered back to Ellie, Ellie, I have to go. I'll be back for you, I promise. Please come back. Don't worry, I will. I raised myself off the floor. Someone was down there, and they needed my help. I decided to come back when everyone was asleep. For now, I would have to wait. Son, where are you? I heard Klaus's voice echo through the high ceiling as I heard the thuds of his shoes. I approached him slowly as he walked down the spiral staircase. What happened to you? He asked. You look like you've seen the dead walking around. I have no words to describe this place. It's amazing. Well, I'm glad you like it, he smiled. Anyway, your parents are upstairs getting settled, so I was thinking we'd have a little talk in the meantime, while we're alone. Sure. He walked me down to the library section of the house until we stood at its entrance. As you might know, son, Uncle Klaus said, his voice turning into a deep, serious tone, I have been gone for a while, away from my family, away from anyone. After Laura died, it left me empty, hopeless. All I had left was my research and my humility. He turned to look back at the doors. But there was one piece of hope that still resided in me. It was in the core of my research, in its foundation. He carefully unlocked the doors to the library, and they both opened slowly with a loud creak. As the library revealed itself, my eyes gazed in wonder. The interior of the place was teeming with books. They overflowed from high cabinets that stretched to the walls, and books were also laid across many tables, and especially the floor. The entrance had a huge carpet that led from one side of the room to the other, and 2 staircases that lined up on either side, leading to a second-floor balcony that encircled the top of the library. Uncle Klaus led me to the center of the room. A compass was painted directly in the middle of the interior, and he told me to stand on it with him. I edged forward and stood on the compass. Uncle Klaus stood still for a few seconds looking at one of the windows of the library, and then looking back at the compass on the floor. He repeated this action a few more times, and then finally smiled. "There we are," he said. "Come, I have something to show you." As I followed him, I decided to ask him what he had done earlier with the compass. "It's relatively straightforward, son, but it's also easily overlooked. You see, I positioned the windows of the library in just a way that when sunlight or moonlight passes through it, it hits the compass at a certain angle. This, in turn, shifts the entrance to, well, you'll see." He stopped after arriving at one of the bookshelves on the far side of the wall. "But there's one downfall to the entrance system. It doesn't work during the night when there's a new moon." Uncle Klaus pulled 2 books out of the shelf to show a hidden lever in a small opening. He then pulled it down, and immediately the bookshelf slid to the right, and in its place was a small lit-up tunnel. It took us a few minutes to walk down the steps of the tunnel, but we finally arrived at the end. The stairway led us to another small hallway. I thought the mansion on its own was incredible, but this was a whole new level. At the end of the hallway stood a black door. There was a keypad into which Uncle Klaus punched in a code, and the door swung open. Once we were inside, I stood speechless again. This secret place was an underground lab. There were computers and monitors that layered every wall, cabinets and shelves plastered with files, and lots of papers strewn across on desks. "This, son, is my life's research. I've been hiding it for a very long time. Well, until now." "Uncle Klaus?" I asked. "What's all this about? What actually happened?" He walked over to a table and sat down. "Come, sit here. I'll start from the beginning." I walked over and sat down in front of him. "I used to be the prime member of an organization dedicated to researching the most unexplainable events to mankind. I'm sure you've heard of many incidents of people claiming to see creatures, unimaginable monsters. They're not all wrong. There are mysterious forces all around this world, and the ones we've encountered are just minimal instances." He leaned in closer. "But I may have found a creature of devastating evil, a monster so vile, so full of death, it may just put us all in danger." What did you find?" My voice was now a whisper. Uncle Klaus stared into my eyes. "I think I found a real demon." "How is that possible?" "It's a long story, son. I'll have to fill you in later. All you need to know is, the one I found isn't the last." Uncle Klaus got up. "I think your parents are waiting. We better get going." "Actually, Uncle Klaus," I stopped him. "Can I please take a look around here?" "Sure. You know what? How about I go see how your parents are doing while you take a few minutes in here?" "Sounds good, thanks." He nodded and proceeded to walk out of the lab. I watched him as he made his way out of the lab. After he left, I took a few moments to analyze any information that Uncle Klaus had taken over the years on his research. Sure enough, there was some messed up cases in there, but those sounded like nightmares for another day. I was mainly focused on the demon. Uncle Klaus had lots of sketches of the creature to define its shape, long claws, crooked and broken wings, a long scaly body. It had 3 eyes on its forehead and 2 on each shoulder. Each eye had vertical irises. The sharp teeth were also hard to miss. This can't be possible, I thought. I examined more of the research. Uncle Klaus had spent years figuring out the secret behind these entities. He tried to figure out why these creatures had gone unnoticed for a long time, but he never really mentioned anything about where or how he encountered the demon. Looks like I'll have to ask him more questions. As I was reading, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a small white door at the far corner of the lab. I didn't notice it earlier. Being curious, I decided to go check it out. It was the same size as the black door with a similar keypad. To my luck, I punched in the same code that Uncle Klaus used, and the door swung open. I made a mental note to apologize to Uncle Klaus for using his code without his permission. The interior of this room was surprisingly different from the main lab. The whole room was dark except for the lights that emanated from very large tube-like cylinders. The large tubes were lined up in a straight row. Each cylinder was filled with a different colored liquid. I walked down the row looking into each tube, but saw nothing in the liquid. However, as I neared the last tube, there was no fluid in it. Instead, a person was sitting in it. It was a girl. She had her head in her arms. "Ellie? Ellie, is that you?" I asked her. I hoped I was right. She looked up. Yes. Were you the one that talked to me from up there?" She pointed at the top of the tube. "Yeah, I promised I'd be back for you." "How did you get in here?" she said as she stood up, putting her head on the glass. She was wearing blue jeans and a tight jacket. She had long hair that flowed down to her back, and her expression looked weak and dejected. Let's just say my Uncle Klaus decided to show me some surprises. "Uncle Klaus?" "You know, the person you were talking about earlier, the one who kidnapped you." She nodded slowly. "Well, that's my great-uncle." Ellie stood still for a few seconds. "Don't worry, Ellie, I'll get you out of here." I looked around for anything to break the tube's glass. "There's a control panel over there," Ellie said, pointing to the corner of the room. "But I don't know the code." I gazed to where she was pointing and saw a small keypad panel that sat attached to the wall. I walked over to inspect it. As usual, it was the same keypad. If I'm not wrong, I punched in the same code from all the other keypads. This should work. Right afterwards, I heard the sound of the tube opening. Ellie walked out, taking small steps at a time. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." But before I could reply, the sound of an alarm blared throughout the room. "We have to go!" Ellie screamed over the loud noise. We both ran out of the entrance to the room and made our way back into the main lab area. The alarm kept ringing in our ears. "Follow me!" I yelled at Ellie, but as I turned around to face forward again, standing a few feet in front of me was Uncle Klaus. "Son, what are you doing?" "Uncle Klaus," I yelled back, "how can you kidnap this girl? What has she ever done to you?" "Get away from her. It's not safe." Uncle Klaus slowly approached us. "You have to listen to me." He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, his eyes shifted to Ellie, and he pointed at her with trembling fingers. She's it." The words barely got out of his mouth. I turned around to face Ellie. "Ellie, what is he talking about?" I couldn't speak either. I stared in horror as a small smile began to creep its way up her lips. What scared me even more was the withered, demented wings that began to form behind her.